Chanley Painter still with us and joining us from Washington, D.C., trial attorney, entertainment attorney, Seth Berenzweig. Seth, let me start with you. From your perspective, do you think it was proper during the 3-day break that this jury took for Donna Rotunno to pen an op-ed and then implore the jurors to do something in that op-ed?
Well, from a public relations standpoint, you could argue that it was an interesting approach, but in terms of the process, it seems pretty dangerous. She literally used words, as you've highlighted, that makes it sound like she's really speaking to the jury. This is something that is really coloring outside the lines, to put it diplomatically, and I suspect that she's going to get an earful from the judge, potentially. This is something that's really unusual, and frankly, it really highlights the unusual nature of this trial. There's been so much going on and leading up to this jury deliberation that we're really in a very unique time, not only from an entertainment perspective in terms of people that are being held accountable in Hollywood, but just from the overall sense of these kinds of cases jurisprudentially. You just don't see something like that, so it's highly unusual.
Chanley, any buzz at the courthouse about this? I know it's a holiday and it's closed. Any buzz at the courthouse, number one? And if there's no one there to buzz, then number two, covering this case, do you expect that this may be addressed before the jury instructions?
I've spent 7 weeks with Jonah Luzzi in the courtroom, and I expect her to say something tomorrow morning about this. I remember day one, January 6th, first day I was in the courtroom, there was this status conference, and Jonah Luzzi then complaining about the defense team going on a media tour the weekend before jury selection, and the judge did limit their ability to speak to the media, particularly about the witnesses in the case. And I noticed that this op-ed is not about the witnesses in the case, so maybe she was able to get around that ruling from the judge in doing this over the weekend.
All right, Seth, this is obviously, as you mentioned, this is a big case. It has a huge impact. It has already had an impact on society and Hollywood and everything else. But at the end of the day, there are big trials all the time. This is what we do day in and day out at Court TV, by the way. It's just cover high-profile cases. And there are cases where the defendant is public enemy number one. And I've seen public enemy number one found not guilty. Am I crazy to trust jurors?
Well, I think that it's the system that we have, and when it operates correctly, I think it's frankly the best system in the world. Really, the case rises and falls based upon the evidence. And at the end of the day, what really matters in terms of what gets plugged into the consideration by the jurors is how the attorneys were able to present the evidence and how compelling it is. And I have to tell you that I thought that defense counsel in this case did a very good job of planting seeds, potentially of reasonable doubt, in the minds of the jury. Keep in mind also the context of where we are in this, because you raise an interesting point. We look at historic cases all the time, but this one's a little bit different. When you talk about Harvey Weinstein, he has had dozens and dozens of accusations with regard to sexual harassment, sexual assault. But because of the bankruptcy case in Delaware and a lot of the insurance proceeds that have been gathered there, most of those cases are being settled through the Delaware Bankruptcy Court, and Harvey Weinstein isn't even paying for that. For the most part, insurance companies are coming in, and dozens of female victims feel some pressure to accept that because they don't really have a lot of leverage going up against someone who's so powerful. So you have these settlements going on in the background, which are happening quietly, which is why one of the reasons why it's such a unique highlight of what's going to be happening in this case. And I agree with what you said before the break. We could very well have a verdict by Friday. I think it's likely. And the defense counsel has done a very good job with the accusations and the allegations here. So we could have a blockbuster result here by Friday afternoon.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Seth, about the reaction? Guilty versus not guilty in terms of what happens, Me Too, Hollywood, and the rest of society? How much does this verdict have some sort of repercussion afterwards?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is going to have huge repercussions throughout the entertainment industry, but also throughout all aspects of business, because the Me Too movement was, for the most part, triggered because of Harvey Weinstein. And there has been a lot of cultural reckoning and a lot of corporate accountability. So if this individual, if everyone's going to be looking towards trying to accept some kind of accountability, but we're sitting here on Friday, and if there's an acquittal on Friday and Harvey Weinstein is not held accountable, then can you imagine the kind of repercussions that this is going to flash throughout the country from coast to coast? I think this is going to be a huge result. It's going to have a major impact inside and outside of Hollywood. And again, I think that you really are going to have to brace yourself for either potentially an acquittal or even a hung jury, because remember, the prosecution has to convince 12 jurors. The defense only has to convince one juror.
Absolutely. Chanley, before we go here, outside the courthouse, what have we seen an uptick in activity during closing arguments, or perhaps is there an expectation that people may show up during the verdict watch or at the moment of the verdict?
We expect it to be a complete circus at the moment of the verdict, with everyone descending on the courthouse here. But I noticed Thursday and Friday there was definitely more media, more cameras along the street, along the barricades. I know you were here for a week or so. It's going to be like that again, I believe, this week, because it did pick up, even more so for the prosecution Friday than the defense on Thursday.
All right, Chanley Painter, we'll talk to you a little later in the program. Seth Berenzweig joining us from Washington, D.C. tonight. Thank you, sir. Great to have you on the show.